Happy Saturday and welcome to the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, February 20th, 2021. Um, uh, it, Joe Biden's 1 month anniversary as President of the United States. We're back here again on Saturday to talk to you about all the stuff that's going on in the news, a different take. Right? We like to have long discussions and we like to talk about history here and we like to talk about things in a different way than you're normally accustomed to. As usual, joining me to try to put things into perspective is Val Atkinson. He's the host of Connections on Fox 107, 104 here in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's also past professor at North Carolina Central University. Val, welcome back to the deal.
Thanks, Ed. Good to be here, buddy.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Nicole McFarland, professor of English and gender studies at Fayetteville State, will be back with us next week. Again, she had to take some time off to take care of some family stuff related to COVID-19, which we'll talk about COVID-19 a little bit later, and things seem to be clearing up there. So we'll be glad to have her back. Also next week, just a program note, Melanie Stewart, is she has a lot of distinctions, but one of them is that she was the oldest Mrs. Campbell University. She was 32 years old when she went back to college. She had lived a interesting life prior to that, just working, and then she goes back to college. Now she's Dr. Melanie Stewart with a PhD. She started a school down in a little county called Harnett County, North Carolina, which is where I'm from, which is where I know her. She's written a book and she's out helping homeless people and doing a whole bunch of stuff. It's an amazing story. She'll be with us next week. So join us for that and mark that down, Dr. Melanie Stewart, to talk about how she's trying to help homeless families throughout North Carolina. But Val, let's get to business. Uh, it was cold in Texas. Needless to say, it was colder in Texas than it was in Alaska. There was a winter storm that brought freezing rain, snow, ice, everything that you don't get in Texas, even in February. I've been in Houston in February in short sleeve shirt and shorts, and now they had below freezing temperatures and even below zero temperatures in some parts of Texas. Catch us up on what happened in Texas and why did it happen, Val?
Well, obviously, Texas is in a climate area that doesn't experience below freezing temperatures. That's putting it mildly, and that's a gross understatement. People go to Texas to get warm from places like even North Carolina. So they weren't prepared. One of the other reasons they weren't prepared, Texas is a loner when it comes to sharing resources as far as energy grids are concerned, being susceptible to governmental regulations, and they wanted to go their own way, which they were within minutes of really having a catastrophic failure statewide, because they have something called ERCOT that really means Texas is so big, it doesn't need anybody else. So they don't need any help. They can go it alone. They're going to revisit this, I'm sure, because next time they may not be so lucky. And people lost their lives. And we haven't even tallied the loss of property, the value of all of the property loss. It was humongous. You're talking about not just below freezing, Ed, but below zero temperatures in Texas. And the thing that bothered folks most, in addition to not having power, because you expect to lose power, are the water conditions. People don't have news commentators saying, okay, it's getting to be winter, folks. Make sure you turn off your outside hoses and make sure they don't have to worry about that. So people probably had garden hoses still running and open and those sorts of things. And for people that live in warm climates, you should know that's how pipes freeze and burst. Solid water, H2O, is more dangerous than the liquid kind in some cases, because when it turns to a solid and it expands and it's strong enough to burst pipes. And when that pipe bursts, the water goes all over everywhere, starts on the top floors, unfortunately. If you're like me and you got a hot water heater in the attic, the wrong place to be. But it was horrible, Ed, and I don't wish that on my worst enemies. It looks like they're turning the corner right now, and it looks like they're going to be able to get a handle on this. Temperatures are expected to be back in the 60s here tomorrow or the next day. And I think they've turned the corner, but I hope there has been a lesson learned. That is, come back to the United States, stop playing this I can go it alone a mess. And it's been the Republican governor and the Republican legislature that's done these kinds of things. And I can tell you right now, Ed, Democrats are already having this as one of their priority pieces in their next run for the legislature and for the governorship of Texas.
And it should be. I want to remind you, number one, you're watching The Deal. That's Val Atkinson. I'm Ed Clark. We're talking about, first of all, the tragedy in Texas. Whether act of God, you can't do anything about it, but you can plan ahead. And one of the things Texas did not do, and it's very clear, and Val had a good assessment of it, is they wanted to go along on their own electric grid through a service called ERCOT, and apparently it doesn't work very well and nearly collapsed. Val, one of the other things is, it is for nearly a decade, I was a spokesman for FEMA. And so I would travel all over the country during disasters and talk to people about how to recover and so on and so forth, where to get resources, work with governors on how to get the message out on how to get services or whatever. And one of the things in this kind of crisis is, if you don't have electricity, you don't have TV. You don't have any way to get the word out. People don't know where to go or what to do. So that speaks to the need to have FEMA respond. And one of the things I did see is that unlike what the past president, what Joe Biden calls the former guy, used to do when there was a disaster, he doled out disaster relief based on who he liked. Joe Biden quickly went ahead and authorized resources from FEMA to go to Texas, and it wasn't a question about it at all. Which brings me to something that is a little bit esoteric for most people, but we've never really had a good disaster recovery act. A lot of it is put back on the states, where they just don't really have the ability to do it. And if you have a governor and legislature who do stupid things and put you at greater risk, it's harder for you to recover. So I think that's one of the lessons from that. The other lesson is Ted Cruz is the biggest hypocrite in America. Ted Cruz got caught trying to go to Cancun, and he tried to blame it on his kids, Val. Talk to me about Ted Cruz, and or like we like to say, lying Ted Cruz, and his whole thing about trying to sneak off to Cancun in the middle of this.
Ted Cruz is one of the more puzzling politicians that I've run across in my 40, 50 years of really being closely involved in politics, Ed. I mean, I don't understand how he can allow, first of all, someone to impugn the reputation of his dad, someone who can call his wife ugly. And he pretends to be ticked off at that. Then he comes around and kisses the ring of that very person who's been doing these awful things to his family. I don't understand how you do that, how you do something like go to Cancun when you are one of the 2 U.S. senators that represent your entire state. Everybody's suffering. Everybody's afraid. They're looking for leadership. They're looking for people to do things for them. And you think family first. That's why you're in a position of leadership in the Senate and in your family. Even if your daughter would have said, Dad, let's go somewhere warm. I need to go to Cancun. It's your job as leader to say, no, we can't do this. We got to set an example for the other people in Texas. and we've got to show that it's tough, but we can handle it, and we're going to get through this thing okay. So let's start. That's what he should have been doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he blew that opportunity. But Ted Cruz, you got to understand this about Ted Cruz. He knows which side of his bread has the butter on it. And what I'm talking about here, he knows that the only thing he's got to do to stay in office is to convince people that he is on the side of people who's about the business of white nationalism and white supremacy. Although technically speaking, he can't show that he doesn't have a non-white somewhere in his lineage.
Right.
You know, we take a look at his last name, and people don't care. As a matter of fact, he gets the support of many people who we call brown people. We're talking about Latinos and Hispanics, whatever you like to term you like to use. They vote for him because his last name is Cruz.
That's the wrong reason. But you know, Val, the other thing about Ted Cruz is you're talking there about his hypocrisy and how he's managed to still somehow win in Texas. I don't. A lot of it is, you know, maybe because of his last name and so on and so forth. He's also hitched his wagon to Donald Trump. He's hitched his wagon to the evangelical Christians who, again, I don't speak highly of them, and I get a lot of flack for it. So whatever, it's my show, so I can say what I want. White evangelicals do not believe in Christianity. They believe in Americanism, and I'm going to stick to that, and I'm not going to change my opinion on that. And whatever, in a specific kind of Americanism at that. But Ted Cruz was also one of the senators, along with Josh Hawley, who stood up on January the 6th and vouched for the Republicans who wanted to hold up the process of approving the electors for Joe Biden. Talk to me about Ted Cruz and his responsibility for January 6th. We know that Donald Trump walked. In my piece this week on my website, The Deal with EdClark.com, it's called How the Confederacy Won, or the acquittal of Donald Trump, which is one and the same to me, is that white men get off on crimes because of who they are, period. Point, no discussion beyond that. But you have to have enablers, and Ted Cruz is one of those enablers. Talk to me about Ted Cruz. Can you figure out why he's enabling these white supremacists? Is it only because he's just so into being in power?
Well, power is the key word here, Ed. He knows that he may or may not win a general election the next time. But the other piece of knowledge that he has and carries around with him is the fact that he can't even run in the general election if he doesn't win the primary. So he's taking first things first. And he knows, because he's a part of the Republican Party, that if he doesn't toe the line, and right now, too many of those guys think that towing the line means adhering to whatever Donald Trump feels, thinks, or says. So that's why he takes these crazy positions. He's running for the primary right now. He's starting right now. And he doesn't want to do anything to really anger Donald Trump's base. I call it the old Tea Party. That's why he's doing this. Mark my word, Ed, once his primary is over, you'll see a different Ted Cruz. You'll see a Ted Cruz in the wake of Lindsey Graham. You see how Lindsey tried to change, and he changes back and forth and back and forth. It depends upon who he's running against and what election is it. Is it the primary or is it a general election? And Ted Cruz is betting his money right now that taking the positions that he's taken will help him win the primary. He'll worry about the general election when it comes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. The other thing, though, is you brought up Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham had, I think Lindsey Graham is running scared. Donald Trump has something on this guy. You know, one minute he stands up and says that he's a xenophobic, racist, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Then the next minute, he's his biggest ally. Then he says, I'm done with it on January 6th, that Trump's responsible. And then the next day, he's like, Trump's not responsible. And then of course, he's the first one to run into the room with the lawyers for Donald Trump during the impeachment trial, and advises the lawyers for Donald Trump during the impeachment trial. Imagine that if we were in real court, and, and one of the jurors was constantly going into the room with the attorneys for the person that's on
For the
trial.
defense. Yeah.
That's crazy to me. Val, that brings me to I want to segue a little bit, because that makes me think about something that we've talked about before, which is why we are at the point that we are. There are still, in whatever the number is, I don't care if it's 100 million. There is a significant number of people who will believe this nonsense, and will even be willing to invade the Capitol and kill police officers, and so on and so forth. And a lot of those people ended up being military folks. And we're running up on a break. So what I want you to think about, Val, when we come back, we're going to pick up here, is I've seen some very disturbing stories about some of those people in the military. And you spent a lot of time in the military in a recruiting command. You got people into the military. I want you to talk to me about why so many of these guys are military related that are now tied up into the insurrection on 1/6. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, Val's going to fill us in on why the military is a problem, or a place that can grow these kind of terrorists. So we'll be right back right after this message.
Our lives have been turned upside down by COVID-19. When a vaccine becomes available, it's critical that all of us get it. What we do as individuals will impact everyone's health, including those who can't get the vaccine. We won't get through this unless everyone takes part. Now is the time to get up to date on all recommended vaccines for both kids and adults. Experts say it's more important than ever for everyone to get their flu vaccine this year. And if you're older, you should get both the flu and pneumonia vaccines, since both illnesses can make COVID-19 even worse. Vaccines are available at a lot of convenient places, so be an example for friends and loved ones and encourage them to get vaccinated too. We all want to reunite, travel, and get back to school and work. But that means we all need to get on board. This is the time to do what's right for each other. Get vaccinated. It's our best shot.
Back to the deal. It is Saturday, February 20th, 2021. That's Val Atkinson. I'm Ed Clark. This is The Deal. And we're talking about Texas and being frozen over, colder than Alaska, and the hypocrisy of Ted Cruz and the Republicans, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we got a lot of other stuff to deal with. But Val, when we left, I said I want you to talk to me about the military and its involvement in 1/6/21, a date which will live in infamy. I mean, 5 people died on that day at the Capitol in an attempt to disrupt Joe Biden becoming president. This is also the 1-month anniversary of his swearing in. And what a difference a month makes. There's no tweets. The vaccine is rolling out, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk about that later. But Val, I saw a story on military.com this week about a retired Navy lieutenant commander who had planned on being the leader of the insurrection, and a number of other military people that were involved. Tell me what you know about military folks and their involvement in right-wing politics, and not just right-wing politics, but in white nationalist, neo-Nazi, even anti-democratic, even though they serve in the U.S. military. How does that work? And what is their connection to 1/6?
Well, I think a good starting point on this, historically speaking, would be 1948. That's when President Truman, really desegregated the military. And I think it was Executive Order 1951, if I'm not mistaken. But at any rate, a lot of white people didn't like that. They didn't like the notion of having to fight alongside African Americans. And the next war we had after that happened was the Korean conflict. And that was very, very difficult. Of course, I entered the military in 1962, and I can tell you from a personal perspective, there were lots and lots of people in the military who did not want, a lot of white people did not want blacks there. There were fights, and one of the ways to get fired real quick, if you were a commander, and most of these commanders were white, if you had a lot of racial tension and violence in your unit. So there were fights and a lot of problems going on, and they swept it under the rug. They didn't report it. So there was a lot of mess going on during that time. And whites, it was easy, nothing to walk into some day room or whatever and see whites on one side and blacks on the other, Confederate flags everywhere, country music blaring loudly, people using the N-word. I mean, that was the United States military back in the early 60s. That's exactly the way it was. And people knew it, and it just went on. It hasn't changed 100%. There's been considerable changes, but it hadn't totally flipped, done a 180 since then. And you have a lot of people that succumb to the culture of the military. When they go in, and to them, they find themselves in a place that, oh, this looks like home. These people look like my freckle-faced next door neighbor. It's mostly white here. The white people understand. And it was a lot different than what it is now. I remember the first time we had what we call a soul food dinner day in what we used to call the mess hall, when they would have collard greens, right? And ham hocks and those kinds of things. They didn't even have that back during that time. You couldn't have it. It was against everything. And you'd go into the barracks and people got rebel flags, got the Confederate flags on their foot locker. And if you dared to have a photograph of Sojourner Truth, or if you dared to have a photograph of somebody like a Paul Robeson, you could get in trouble. They called you a radical. But the people with Jeff Davis and Robert E. Lee's picture on their wall, they were patriots. This is the United States Army I'm talking about. So it had a good starting point. Fast forward to 1980, when Ronald Reagan gets elected, people saw again that here is my time. He's going to allow me to go around the world and show people who the boss is. You got to remember, a lot of these kids are 18-year-old kids that are coming in the military for the first time, played football, played basketball in high school. They're used to being on a winning team. They're used to their coach allowing you to rub your opponent's face in the dirt. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to go out and show the armies of the world that the United States Army is the best. And they had their chest stuck out. So they went along with whatever president allowed them to do that. Started these conflicts, gave them a pay raise, didn't allow people to mess with them. They became Republicans. So if you were in the military and you were a Democrat, you almost had to explain why. You were considered to be a radical. So it was easy to be a Republican. Now we're setting the stage, and we're setting the positions and circumstances that fast forward to 2021, and you see who's in the military, who's left over. What is the attitude and the culture there? So when you see or hear stories about police forces and National Guard and Reserve and the active duty military and veterans have people who are participating in an insurrection at the National Capitol building, I'm going to be the last one that's surprised, because it's a hotbed for that kind of thought. They believe that their job is to protect and pretend white folks. They believe that their job is to keep people in place. And I'll be interested to see your writing to see if you touch on this. After the Civil War was over, the next thing was to make sure the Indians stayed in place.
Yeah.
Right? And then it switched to African Americans. It's always been the military and the paramilitary organizations' goal, and they saw it as their responsibility to keep non-whites in place.
Yeah, so that's Val Atkinson, and again, one thing I know we do every week, Val, is we drop a history lesson on why we are where we are currently, and that's a great summation. And I don't even think people even think about it. 1948 was, when they desegregated the army, or military, but it took a long time. And it's taken a long time for that to be meaningful, even though there are a large number of African Americans who've always served from the very first conflict all the way till now. We've always been second, third, eighth thing on the list. The primary goal is to, like you said, protect white people in this whole notion that America is somehow the best place in the world, but at the same time, we can discriminate against people. So, like you said, fast forward to 1/6. On that day, you saw men walking into the Capitol in a line. They had their hands on each other's back. They were in military formation. They were dressed like they were in the military. They were aping everything that they probably had done when they were in Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever. And then the people who had never served, and this is a weird phenomenon to me, Val. I like to dig into this at some point. White guys who pretend like they've been in the military, which is really weird to me. Why would you just join?
Right.
Right. But anyway, so you get this militarization of white supremacy, this paramilitary dressing like you're in the military, or dressing like you're a policeman, or policemen dressing like they're in the military even, right? And so you had these people who went to the Capitol and did the destruction, and now they're arresting some of these people, and some of these people being charged. Like I said in the piece that I wrote for this week, I talked about how after Appomattox, you would have expected Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis and all those people to be taken into custody and then summarily hung for being rebellious against the United States, but they were given a pass. They actually got roads and schools and everything else named after them. Then after that, we went another 140 years trying to take down these monuments and schools and roads and buildings that they got named after them. And Black folks are the enemy, not the people who actually rebelled against the government. But and so I guess my question is there retribution for these people who even invaded the Capitol 150 years after the Civil War? The Confederate flag never made it into the Capitol during the Civil War, but it did during this insurrection. How is that possible? And will these people, get anything more than a few years, maybe, and so on and so forth? We know Donald Trump walked, and he's never going to face anything from it.
I don't know about whether they will or not, Ed. I can say, and I'm sure you agree with me, that they should. If we're going to have anything close to having a real criminal justice system and having a law that holds everybody accountable the same, as the 14th Amendment says, equal protection, if we're going to do that, you've got to allow the law to work for and with everyone, and not just depending upon what your political ideology happens to be at that time. So we're hoping that it does. My fear is that it won't. And one of the problems is that we have an administration, and this is not to talk harshly or badly about the Biden-Harris administration, but you have an administration that's in power along with the House and Senate that values compromise and deal making and getting along more than they do justice sometimes. And they should be about the business of retribution. They should be about the business of punishing those folks who actually broke the law, as opposed to letting somebody get away with it and hopefully they have an awakening to see the error of their way. I don't believe in that. I think you punish them, rightfully so, and you send a message to those who are thinking about doing it in the future. Right now, the message that's been sent, Ed, is that if you have a high enough up position, you can threaten to overthrow the government of the United States of America and get away with it.
Yeah, that is the moral of that story, and I'm really sick of it. I wish and I hope, and I know Joe Biden has done everything he can to walk this tightrope and not say anything about it, and he keeps saying that the courts will take care of it, or he wants to move on. I don't want to move on. If we don't at some point put a kibosh to this bull, it'll continue forever. I know there's been strides made. Nobody can tell me that 1619 to now that strides haven't been made. You and I are sitting here talking about it openly. In the past, we could have been killed for it. I watched Judas and the Messiah this week about Fred Hampton, leader of the Black Panthers, who was murdered. He was in his early 20s, Val. Imagine if people like Fred Hampton and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they were all young men. Had they been able to live and work in their community, they were feeding damn kids in Chicago, and the cops couldn't stand it. They couldn't stand the fact that Black folks were standing up for themselves, and they went on a campaign to kill them. And one of the undercurrents in the movie, it's no spoiler alert here. We know how Fred Hampton ended up, but one of the undercurrents was that the FBI agents, in grooming the Black people to give up information on Fred Hampton, kept saying, well, it's just like the Klan. There's no difference between the two. But the difference in America is we've never treated the Klan as a terrorist organization like we treated the Black Panthers, or even SNCC or the NAACP. There's always been infiltrators into those organizations trying to tear them up from the inside. And they haven't really done the same, or at least we haven't seen that same kind of effort put into white organizations. And one last thing I'll say about that, Val, is one thing that I have read in the last couple of days is there were some federal agents embedded in some of these groups. The guy who was leading the Proud Boys ended up being an informant for the FBI for years. And now he's disappeared. And we haven't seen anything about him lately. I'll be interested to see what happens with that. But what I know is that I just looked over here at the clock, and we're ready up on for a break again. So what I want you to think about while we're out on the break, Val, is I want to switch gears a lot and talk about COVID-19. And you got some good news about COVID-19 that I want you to tell everybody. So everybody stay right there. We'll be right back after this message. Happy birthday to you.
I've never done this before.
Happy birthday to you.
We're here for Precious.
Happy birthday, dear Precious.
Day 4.
You may not understand.
Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, so
is chapter 32.
We don't want to miss an opportunity in our community to protect ourselves, especially since our community is disproportionately affected in a negative way right now.
And we've got to encourage those in our community to realize that we've got to look forward and we've got to find ways to be much more trusting and engaging and recognize the importance of the vaccine in helping us defeat this incredible virus.
And actually, I've been dreading the little pinch of the needle. I didn't even hurt, I didn't even feel it. This is just a win-win-win. And, I would encourage everyone to take advantage of it. It doesn't take a lot of time or effort, and it doesn't even hurt.
You have a spot, get the shot. But that's what I used to do.
And welcome back to The Deal. It's Saturday, February 20, 2021. And we are on The Deal with Ed Clark and Val Atkinson. And we've been talking about a lot of stuff. And before we left, Val, we were talking about Fred Hampton. And I do, again, take history very seriously. And if you haven't seen Judas and the Black Messiah, please watch that. It's if you don't know the story of Fred Hampton, you should. It's a very important. I think if you don't understand the Black Panthers and what they were actually about, you should watch it and understand what the United States government did, Val, to assassinate a number of young Black leaders or imprison them to get them out of the way because J. Edgar Hoover was a racist. He was a cowardly racist crossdresser who wanted to crush any dissent from Black groups. It didn't matter who the president was. It didn't matter, about the Civil Rights Act or any of that kind of stuff. He was willing to crush any Black leader that he thought was going to unseat white supremacy. And I recommend that movie. Val, the other thing we were talking about as we left for the break is COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccinations. And one disturbing statistic I saw this morning was only 6% of the people who've been vaccinated so far are African American. The troubling part to me is, one, is there's more colored folks than that. And two, we have been disproportionately affected by COVID. So there seems to me to be a disconnect between how the vaccine is being distributed. However, there is some good news. There's this one guy I know who lives in Holly Springs who's had both vaccinations, and his name is Val Atkinson, and he happens to be African American, and he happens to be right here. So, Val, tell me about your vaccination journey, the story of you getting it. Was it complicated, so on and so forth, and how did you react to it, and how do you feel?
Wasn't complicated at all. It didn't hurt at all. And I'm glad we saved this to this portion of the show to talk about it, Ed, because people can attest to the fact that they didn't know whether I had it or not before I tell them. So I'm a living testament so far that everything is fine. My wife, who's an incessant reader, was online taking a look at COVID-19 issues and how you find out where to go. And she just made a call to Rex, UNC Rex, and they said, yeah, when you want to come, and how many in your family wants to come with you? So she made the appointment. It was about 2 weeks ago. We had our first shot. We took the Pfizer shot, had our first shot, and was scheduled to come back 2 weeks later, which was yesterday, to get the second Pfizer shot. Walked in, no problem, sat down. They checked all of my information to verify I was who I said I was. They stuck the needle in the arm while they talked about other things to take my mind off of it. and away I went. After the first shot, there was a little soreness in the arm for a few hours. That went away. And after the second shot, I haven't felt anything other than a little soreness this morning, about the same as the first time 2 weeks ago. But I'm living testament that it can be done, it can be accessed. So let's get out there and do it. Now, having said all of that good stuff, I understand how people, especially in my age group, they remember all of the stories about the Scarborough boys and about Tuskegee experiment and all of those bad things, eugenics and the whole mess that people have gone through to really impact the health of African Americans in a negative way. And they are afraid. They are afraid of people doing something wrong to them. My message to those people is this, Ed. It's worth the risk if you think it's a risk. I don't think it's a risk because like Ed says all the time, folks, you're going to die one day. The question is how, where, and when. Okay, that's the only question it is. I like to put a caveat in there and say that there is a couple of whats, what did you die for? And the most important one of all is what will people say after you're gone, Ed, in terms of what did he live for? And that's why you got to make good decisions. And even if you have bad reactions to this injection or this vaccination or whatever, you'll be doing the right thing. It's not a question of you take the shot and you survive and you live forever, or you take the shot and you have the complications and you die right away. That's not the issue, guys.
Right.
Do what you're supposed to do for those who are depending upon you for you doing the right thing. You're talking about your kids, your grandkids, your spouses, your siblings, your whatever. Do this for them.
Exactly.
Do the right thing and go get your shots, guys. And I'm not going to give that speech anymore. Took me too long to commit it to memory.
About that, I'm glad you said that, and I am the one who's constantly saying that, there is a time limit on our lives. That it's sobering when you think about it. But it's just a fact. We're human beings and we're part of the animal kingdom. All animals die. There's no such thing as your permanent ness in the physical body, and not to be philosophical or anything, but what is your legacy going to be? Well, you could establish that by being a nice person, and then you can live a little bit longer in the memories of people or whatever. If you're a jerk or if you're somebody that decides that you're going to put everybody else at risk by not getting vaccinated or not wearing a mask or whatever it is you do to make it more difficult for other people or maybe infect somebody else. I mean, I've seen over and over, Val, these videos that get posted of people who coming to the end with COVID who says, well, I wish I had have taken it more seriously. And we saw within the last few weeks a Republican congressman from Texas die from COVID. He was one of the deniers. We saw a Louisiana congressman. He didn't even get to take his seat. He was a denier. He died from COVID, which brings me back to, I went and looked at the calendar, Val, and this week last year, it's the first time me and you had talked about COVID. We were recording something for our show that we do on the radio on Connections, and I had set up the camera and we recorded it, and that's when we first started to hear about COVID. There has been a year of this. It did not have to be. The the fact that we're still talking about it now, and we had to go through the vaccine development, we had to rush that. That does cause some trepidation with people. They've never come up with a vaccine this quick, and then even with that, the Trump administration did not have a plan to distribute the vaccine. He just wanted to say we had one. And so now there's probably going to be 600 million doses available by the end of July. There's a little over 300 million Americans. So that is a dose for every American. And that's extraordinary. However, it never should have been in the first place. America has kept this thing going around the world. Now there's the UK variants that are coming in, the South African variants, and if you don't get vaccinated, we're in big trouble. So let's segue. This still is COVID related. The $1.9 trillion, because I know you're waiting on your check for the $1.9 trillion, Val. We talked a little bit about at the very beginning of the show this hypocrisy of the Republicans. They don't want regulations on anything. You see what that did for Texas. They always talking about the budget and whatever, but they were willing to give a $2 trillion tax cut to rich people that will be, and everything they gave to people that are like us is expiring soon. A lot of people that got assistance through unemployment from COVID relief, I hate to tell you, but you're probably not going to get a tax refund. And this is going to be low income folks because they're going to have to pay taxes on that money that they received for the unemployment, and they're going to get a big surprise, Val.
Yes, yes.
So long-winded here, but the question is the $1.9 trillion that the Democrats have on the table for COVID relief, is that right for right now? Is it covering the right things? Is this a good plan? Should $1.9 trillion be necessary at this point? Or does it even matter what the Republicans say? Should the Democrats just do it?
I think the Democrats ought to just do it, go to reconciliation. Just go do it, make it happen. I think that shows the American people that there's not a lot of pork, fat, and waste in this. They didn't put 1.9 when they really thought that they could get away with 0.90 or whatever. They came up with a number that they thought was needed and worked. And they need every penny of that. Let's go do it. You know, you can't give 1% of the population $2 trillion and then say the other 99 to give the other 99% 1.9 is overkill. You can't do that. So Democrats need to stick to their horses. They need to go with it, and they need to say enough is enough with making the vast majority of us suffer so that the 1%ers can have more than they need. It's crazy. One last thing I want to say about that is that we always go around touting that we're the world's greatest democracy and we're the world's greatest economy and we have the world's greatest military. What is the sense and the use in having all of this if when time of need comes and you don't use it? We were talking about the United States being 4% of the world's population, having 25% of the world's cases and deaths and all of these other kinds of things. Use some of that military might and that economic might that you have to solve problems to help yourself and the rest of the world. I'll go along with you. You are the best when it comes to economy and the military and that kind of thing. What is it good for? Other than keeping your thumb on the neck and keeping your knee on the neck, pardon the pun, keeping your knee on the neck of the rest of the world to make them do as you require them to do. What's the use of the world's greatest economy and the world's greatest military? Use it for what you need it for. And this is one of the needs right now, fighting this pandemic.
Well, we don't do that, Val. We don't help people.
Yeah.
We don't have an ounce of empathy in us, in America for some reason. It's the most baffling thing to me. And but I think that's a good place to end up that conversation. Before we run out of time today, you know, sometimes phrases and words just stick out, and you said knee on the neck, and I do want to point out in the coming weeks we'll have the folks from the George Floyd Memorial Foundation on here. It's an effort that's starting in Raleigh, North Carolina, of all places. George Floyd was born in North Carolina. He has relatives in North Carolina. Val, you'll be interested in this. George's uncle is a Kappa, and here in Raleigh, and we'll have him on. We're hoping in the next couple of weeks to talk about the George Floyd Memorial Foundation. That they're trying to start here in Raleigh. But in addition to that, like I said, we're always talking history here, Val, and it is Black History Month, and obviously with so many things going on, and we kind of got off track with a number of things. There's been some deaths in my family and among family and friends in the last few weeks, and I had meant to do a special on Black history, and we haven't done that. But I told you this morning I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about somebody that you think is really important in Black history that often gets overlooked. Go ahead and tell us who that person is and why you think he's important.
Name first, Paul Robeson. Way back when in school, in K through 12, particularly, there were always assignments that we had to come up with your hero or someone in history that you really respected that a lot of people didn't know about. And I can't remember exactly when I got to the point that I would always choose Paul Robeson as my hero, but every time after that, whenever I was asked a question, I had to do a report or whatever, it was always Paul. And I think the reason I chose him is because he was versatile, multi-talented. I always liked people that were good at several things. That really showed me who he was. Paul was good, and people knew him for his political stances and how he came down on the social side of things, how McCarthy tried to destroy him and almost did politically because of his bent on economics and things of that nature. But he was a singer. He was also a great orator. He did things that people didn't think he could do athletically. Paul had so many gifts that they're almost innumerable, but he loved his people. He loved Black people, and he was willing to do anything that was necessary, including the deprivation of his own goals and ambitions in order to see that the people that he loved so much, African Americans, had an opportunity for advancement. So Paul Robeson is the one in African American history that I would give a shout out to and say, read on it, check him out, see what you think of Paul Robeson.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that one. There's a CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Company, interview with him towards the end of his life, and he was reflecting on the sacrifices he made to give up things. Because you said he was an athlete, actor, a singer. He could dance. He could do everything. He's just a Renaissance man, right?
Absolutely.
And smart. Just a genius. And then, but for the sake of arguing on behalf of African Americans, he gets blacklisted, and of course, they tried to make him out to be just a communist, which he was. He was believed in socialism, but there was a good reason for a lot of Black people to be into socialism because democracy wasn't working. You as a black person, you were not about to become part of the mainstream, right? No matter how talented he was, he had an Ivy League education, but how much did that get you in the 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s, right? So Paul Robeson is a excellent choice, Val, and I do recommend people learn about Paul Robeson, and he's very important. Well, Val, you know what? Time flies when when you're having fun, or sometimes when you're just talking, and we're starting to run out of time. I do want to remind people to come back with us next week. Melanie Stewart will be here. She's an author. She's a PhD. She's a whole bunch of other stuff, but she goes out in the street and into homeless camps. She's feeding people, all that. We want to hear her story. She went to college when she was 32 years old and started then, graduated from Campbell University, went back, got a master's, went back, got a PhD, and she's out in the community doing stuff. So Melanie Stewart will be here. Dr. Nicole McFarland should be back with us. Again, she's had to deal with COVID in her family, but things seem to be okay. Talked with her this morning. She should be back with us. Val Atkinson will be back, and I'll be back, and then we'll waste another hour of your Saturday. And of course, tell people about the deal. Go to thedealwithedclark.com. Go to foxync.com. On Sunday mornings at 8 a.m., me and Val, we chop it up, talk about stuff on Connections. That show's been on a long time. We've got a lot of loyal listeners. So bring people over to the deal, though, because here, we talk about all kind of stuff and we have all kind of guests. And if you got guests or ideas or whatever, please let us know. But in the meantime, go out and do something good for somebody today. And then we'll see you next Saturday. You've been watching The Deal.